Time for Freedom. Mikhail Baranov is in the studio. Hello. This half hour, we discuss the day's top news. On Tuesday night, Russian occupiers attacked Ukraine, launching 110 Shahed, Gerbera, and Almaz-type strike drones, along with other types of UAVs. Ukrainian air defense shot down and suppressed 77 UAVs using electronic warfare systems. Hits were recorded at 14 locations, while debris from downed targets fell at 9 others.
Got it. It's down. Nice shot. Target eliminated. Got it. Down. Coming in.
2 people were killed and 11 others were injured. A child is among the victims. These are the consequences of Russian shelling in the Kherson region. Occupying forces once again struck settlements on the right bank with artillery and multiple launch rocket systems and attacked with various types of UAVs. In Stanislav, railway infrastructure was damaged, along with nearly 10 apartment buildings, a school, a kindergarten, and a clinic. A fire broke out at a construction materials warehouse. The Russian army launched an airstrike on Stepanivka in the Kherson region. According to local authorities, the occupiers dropped 3 guided aerial bombs on the village center, each weighing several hundred kilograms. 4 people were injured, including a 14-year-old boy. Doctors are fighting for the lives of the child and his father. A direct hit by the Russians destroyed a school building. A hospital wing and nearby houses were also damaged. Russian troops are deliberately targeting civilian objects throughout Ukraine. This morning, an administrative building in Novgorod-Syrskyi came under attack. That's in the Chernihiv region. And in Nikopol, in the Dnipropetrovsk region, a commuter bus became the terrorist target. 4 people were killed and 16 were injured. More details on the consequences of the Russian attack in our report.
In Praluki, Chernihiv region, a Russian drone attacked the city council building. According to local authorities, 3 explosions were heard in the city this morning. 5 people were injured and hospitalized with burns. An administrative building in Novgorod-Syrskyi also caught fire after a Russian UAV strike. The hit resulted in a fire covering an area of about 600 square meters. Rescuers extinguished the fire. And this is Nikopol in the Dnipropetrovsk region. Russians used an FPV drone to attack a city bus in the very center of town. It was approaching a stop with passengers, where civilians were also waiting for transport. 4 people were killed and 16 were injured. All of them are local residents, many of whom are retirees.
This was not an accidental strike. It was deliberate terror against civilians, against people who were simply going about their business. Alexander Gonza, head of the Dnipropetrovsk Regional Military Administration, on Telegram. Russia deliberately targeted civilian transport in the city center among peaceful people. This is not a war against an army. This is terror against civilians, a gross violation of international humanitarian law. Dmytro Lubinets, Ukrainian Parliament Commissioner for Human Rights, on Telegram.
Earlier, on April 4th, Russian troops deliberately struck the city market in Nikopol. A fire broke out and dozens of shops and pavilions were destroyed. 3 women and 2 men died then, and another 28 people were injured. The 2 most severely injured are still in intensive care.
Tatiana has a traumatic brain injury. Half her body is riddled with shrapnel, many fragments in her head. Neurosurgeons performed an extremely complex operation.
The second wounded person, a 67-year-old man, owned a cafe that operated at the city market. He also sustained a severe injury. He has already undergone several surgeries. Such shelling of markets, civilian cars, and residential areas is not a mistake for Russians, but a strategy.
An FPV drone is not a missile flying toward a city. The operator sees the target on screen, sees the stalls, sees the people, and presses the button. Their goal is for people to leave, for the frontline city to empty, so no one is left to work, trade, or hold the rear. They cannot advance in this direction with troops, so they are pushing out civilians with terror. Mykola Lukashuk, chairman of the Dnipropetrovsk Regional Council, on Telegram.
Kherson was also under constant Russian shelling on April 6th, following an attack on residential areas. A woman died there, and 8 people were injured. On the morning of April 7th, an aerial bomb struck near a bus stop where people were standing. Natalia Gasova, Volodymyr Steingilov for the Freedom TV channel.
Ukraine's Interior Minister Ihor Klimenko called the Russian FPV drone attack on a bus in Nikopol cynical. He emphasized that the occupiers knew there were people in the vehicle and at the stop.
A brutal strike on civilian public transport during rush hour when people are heading to work. Russia is purposefully targeting civilians. This is no accident. It is their tactic, deliberate strikes against peaceful people. Every such incident is being documented by investigators. Ihor Klimenko, Minister of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, on Telegram.
Russia continues its targeted terror against peaceful Ukrainians. This was President Volodymyr Zelensky's reaction to another Russian attack on Ukrainian territory. The head of state noted that residents of Nikopol, Kherson, and other cities and communities near the front line suffer almost every day. Zelensky called for a joint effort to stop the aggression of the Russian Federation.
When such terror against people and life happens every day, blocking new sanctions against Russia, attempts to weaken sanctions and trade with Russia, look insane. This shouldn't be happening here in Europe or anywhere else in the world, where people are simply being killed in the streets. It's a danger to everyone. Killers always try to go further. They must be stopped immediately and decisively. And this can only be done by everyone together, coordinating and strengthening each other in the defense of life. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, on Telegram.
Russian invaders continue their unsuccessful attempts to improve their tactical position in the Kostiantynivka-Druzhkivka agglomeration. This was stated by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Alexander Syrskyi. He inspected the troops holding the defense in the Donetsk region and repelling attacks by the Russian occupiers.
For almost a year, units of the Corps have been successfully repelling enemy attempts to capture Kostiantynivka, holding positions and inflicting significant losses on the enemy. The command staff demonstrates a high level of adaptability to changes on the battlefield, making proactive and non-standard decisions. Priority areas of work remain the fire destruction of the rear logistics of the Russian occupiers and the neutralization of enemy infantry at the start of assaults. Alexander Syrskyi, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, on Facebook.
150 combat clashes were recorded at the front over the past 24 hours. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the Pokrovsk direction remains key for the Russian army. There, the defense forces stopped 31 assaults by the occupiers. Another 19 attacks were repelled in the Kostantinivka sector, 13 in the Alexandrovka sector, and 11 in the Huliopole sector. Military experts note that the enemy continues to advance, but the nature of their actions now differs somewhat from the plan they tried to implement in the autumn-winter period.
All along the southern flank of our entire defensive line, stretching from Huliopole all the way to the west, the enemy forces are persistently trying to continue their offensive actions toward the critical railway flank of our Orikhiv defense hub. Meanwhile, the dedicated defense forces of Ukraine are actively counterattacking the enemy positions further to the north to maintain control. Consequently, the overall strategic objective of the Russians to advance along the Donetsk-Zaporizhia highway and across a broad and expansive front to the south of our defense line is currently effectively being neutralized and thwarted.
980 Russian occupiers were neutralized in the past 24 hours. Per Ukraine's General Staff, total Russian army losses since the full-scale invasion surpass 1,305,470 soldiers. In addition, the Ukrainian military yesterday destroyed 4 armored combat vehicles, 65 artillery systems, 3 multiple launch rocket systems, and 2 air defense systems of the occupiers, disabled more than 200 vehicles and tankers, and shot down almost 2,000 Russian drones. The Russian army has sharply slowed its pace of offensive operations at the front. In March, the invaders' assault activity reached its lowest level since the start of the full-scale war against Ukraine. This is stated in a report by the Institute for the Study of War. Experts note that one of the reasons is Russia's massive losses at the front. Putin simply doesn't have enough people, so he's forced to take extreme measures. Exactly what those are, you'll find out in our next report.
The plan to recruit contract soldiers for the war against Ukraine is on the verge of failure in Russia. This year, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation expected to attract 409,000 people. That's approximately 35,000 every month. However, the actual pace of Russian mobilization is significantly lower.
Instead of the expected 1,100 to 1,150 contracts per day for 3 months of 2026, the average daily number of people signing a contract was just over 940. At the same time, it must be remembered that the number of people who signed a contract is not equal to the number who arrived at the unit. Roughly speaking, if the trend continues, Russia could fall short by 16%, or more than 65,000 people. From an article by the publication UDF.
Meanwhile, the Russian army's losses at the front remain high. In March alone, Russia lost about 35,000 military personnel. The rate of personnel replacement no longer covers the level of losses, which creates additional pressure on the recruitment system. At the same time, the armed forces of Ukraine are setting new, even larger goals for eliminating occupiers per month.
More than 35,000 occupiers were removed from the battlefield. What does this mean? This essentially signifies that the defense forces are steadily acquiring the necessary capability to perform the task that was clearly established and communicated to the troops, namely, to approach the mark of 50,000 destroyed occupiers on the line of contact every single month. If we successfully eliminate and destroy more than they put into service every month, and we have indeed destroyed more, as a result, their strategic plans and actions for implementation become completely impossible to achieve because there is simply no one left to actively move forward.
Due to the shortage of people, the Kremlin is forced to use the so-called special contingent, that is, convicts, persons under investigation, or defendants. Thus, Russia is actively applying the amendments to the criminal code adopted in 2024, which allow for the conditional or full release from punishment of defendants and convicts who have signed a contract with the Ministry of Defense, were decorated, or were discharged from military service after being wounded.
At least 263 Russians were sentenced to suspended terms or released from colonies on these grounds. Among them are those accused and convicted of drug trafficking, assault, theft, fraud, robbery, drunk driving, corruption, as well as at least one convicted of rape, 13 accused of murder, and 11 accused of inflicting grievous bodily harm resulting in death. From an article by the publication Syrskyi.
At the same time, the Kremlin is increasingly operating through universities. Russian universities are effectively becoming recruitment tools. As reported by the Moscow Times, the country's largest universities were required to send at least 2% of their students to war. And at the Russian Technological University, amid attempts to force students into the army, expulsion rules have been sharply tightened. Now, even a single academic failure can be grounds for expulsion, whereas previously the critical threshold was 5. Previously, students on the verge of expulsion were offered a choice, either lose their place at the university or sign a contract to serve in drone units. Now, the Russian Federation is creating this threshold for expulsion itself. Thus, the system for recruiting people into the army is moving beyond voluntary and increasingly resembles a covert mobilization, experts note.
The government is taking such steps only because it is very afraid of conducting a full mobilization. Well, there it is. And accordingly, the government will surely come up with some new things here in order to delay this moment. Well, there isn't a single good outcome, so to speak, and so all of this, one way or another, is turning against the government, and the Russian troops, the Russian command, are making attempts even now with all sorts of meat grinder assaults, where people don't matter, and they're just thrown, almost unarmed, into the line of fire. So, of course, they're running out of people.
Another source for replenishing personnel, foreigners. Russia plans to attract at least 18,500 citizens of other countries this year. However, problems are arising here as well. A number of states are actively opposing the recruitment of their citizens for the war, which narrows this channel for replenishing the Russian army. As a result, the Kremlin is forced to literally scrape together an army from all possible sources, from prisoners to students and migrants. Maria Zelichenko for the Freedom TV Cheho.